When a proud black belt mocked the janitor in front of his entire dojo, everyone laughed, until the janitor stepped into the ring. What happened next left the whole room in stunned silence, and taught a lesson no one would ever forget. Step into the ring with me. Let's give these students a little show. Those words cut through the dojo like a blade. The voice belonged to Master Kenji, the stern martial arts instructor who ran the school with an iron grip. He was a man whose presence filled the room before he even spoke. His sharp tongue and powerful strikes made him a legend among his students. To them, Kenji was untouchable, a black belt, a master, someone at the peak of martial discipline. But there was another side to him. Behind his carefully built reputation, many whispered that Kenji enjoyed humiliating those he considered weak. It wasn't enough for him to be strong. He wanted everyone else to feel small in comparison. And today, his eyes had landed on someone who had never asked to be part of the spotlight. At the edge of the dojo, mop in hand, stood Marcus. Marcus was the janitor, the man who came in early to sweep the mats before class began and stayed late to polish the floors after everyone had gone home. His uniform was simple, dark overalls slightly worn from years of work. He rarely spoke more than a polite hello, moving silently with the rhythm of a man who had long accepted invisibility. To the students, Marcus was background noise. The clatter of his mop bucket, the squeak of his shoes, the sound of tools fixing a broken light. They saw him daily, but never looked at him. To them, he was just the janitor, a man whose only value was keeping the place clean. But Kenji saw an opportunity. A cruel smirk crossed his face as he pointed directly at Marcus. "You there," Kenji said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Kulme, step into the ring with me." The dojo erupted in surprised whispers. Students exchanged glances, some covering their mouths as they laughed. One boy muttered, "The janitor? He can't even hold his mop straight, let alone fight." Another snickered, "This is going to be good." The challenge wasn't really about testing skill. Everyone knew it. It was about entertainment, Kenji's brand of entertainment. He wanted to put Marcus on the spot, to turn him into the punchline of a cruel joke. Marcus froze. His mop handle was still in his hand, resting lightly on the floor. He looked up slowly, his eyes meeting Kenji's without flinching. There was no anger, no fear, only calm. The silence in the room grew heavy. "No one's laughing yet," Kenji teased. "Come on, Marcus. The students deserve a little fun. Show them what you've got. Or are you too afraid?" That last word, afraid, hung in the air like poison. Some students giggled nervously. Others leaned forward with anticipation. Marcus finally set the mop aside, leaning it gently against the wall. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were considering every step. Then, in a voice low but steady, he spoke. "If you want me to fight, remember, you asked for this." The students gasped. Their laughter stopped. For the first time, they truly looked at Marcus, and a strange shiver passed through the room. Because what nobody knew, what nobody could even imagine, was that Marcus had a past filled with training, a past filled with discipline, a past that was about to change everything. Marcus stood there, his mop still in his hands. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm expression that rarely revealed what he was thinking. To the students, he was simply the man who appeared when the dojo was empty, sweeping floors, or fixing broken pipes. He was invisible background, useful but never respected. Kenji smirked as he looked Marcus up and down. "Come on, Marcus. Just for fun. Show the kids how a mop handles a punch." His tone was dripping with arrogance, a joke that only he seemed to find funny. The students laughed louder this time, eager for the spectacle. Some even clapped their hands, egging the moment on. Their eyes shone with a cruel curiosity. This wasn't about respect. It was about watching a man they thought was powerless be embarrassed by someone they idolized. Marcus remained still, his grip firm on the mop handle. His eyes stayed steady, his jaw relaxed, but inside he was debating. He didn't care about Kenji's mockery. He had faced worse in his life. But what made him pause was the audience. Dozens of young eyes watched, ready to form judgments, ready to learn from what they saw. At first, Marcus shook his head. He didn't want the attention. His life was built on avoiding the spotlight, keeping his past hidden under layers of silence. But Kenji wouldn't stop. "What's wrong?" Kenji taunted, his voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "Afraid? Or do you only know how to clean floors?" The words were meant as a joke, but they carried an edge. Marcus felt them cut deeper than he expected, not for himself, but for what they represented. Disrespect, arrogance, a lesson being taught to these students, that some lives were worth less than others. Marcus finally placed the mop gently against the wall. The clang of the wooden handle against the plaster echoed louder than it should have, making several students flinch. He turned to face Kenji fully, his frame towering, his presence suddenly impossible to ignore. Then, in a voice low but steady, he spoke. "If you want me to fight, remember, you asked for this." The dojo went completely silent. The laughter evaporated as quickly as it had begun. The weight in Marcus's tone was undeniable, a quiet warning that made even the cockiest students shift uncomfortably. A murmur rippled through the circle. No one had expected him to agree. Whispers flew from one corner to the other. "Wait, is he serious? Does he actually know how to fight? This might not be as funny as I thought." The students, driven by curiosity, formed a tighter circle around the two men. Their faces glowed with anticipation, the tension in the room sharp enough to feel in the chest. To them, this was entertainment, an unexpected break from their usual training routine. A free show. But for Marcus, this was something else entirely. This wasn't about proving strength. It wasn't about ego or pride. For Marcus, stepping into that circle meant teaching a lesson, one that every person in that dojo desperately needed to understand. The mop might have been his tool today, but discipline and restraint were his true weapons. And in just a few moments, everyone in the room, including Kenji, was about to find out that the quiet janitor they had mocked was not the man they thought he was. Kenji bowed slightly, his face still carrying that mocking grin, then lunged forward with lightning speed. His first punch sliced through the air like a blade, aimed directly at Marcus's chest. It was fast, so fast that most beginners in the dojo couldn't even see the strike until it was halfway delivered. But Marcus didn't even flinch. With the calmness of a man who had seen this 100 times before, he shifted one step to the side. The punch cut through empty air, missing him by inches. His movements weren't flashy or exaggerated. They were smooth, quiet, almost effortless. The students gasped in unison. Kenji's grin faltered for just a second, but he covered it quickly. He threw a sharp kick, his legs snapping up with the force of a whip. It was the kind of kick that could leave a student doubled over in pain. But once again, Marcus was ready. He lifted his arm, meeting the strike with a controlled block. His feet barely moved. His balance was perfect. To the students, it looked like he wasn't fighting at all. He was simply redirecting energy. That calmness unnerved everyone watching. It was as if Marcus wasn't in danger. He wasn't even trying hard. He was simply observing, reading Kenji's every move as though the black belt were an open book. Kenji's face hardened. His pride was stung. "Come on, janitor," he growled, frustration leaking through his voice. "Fight back." And that was when Marcus finally moved. In a flash, he caught Kenji's wrist mid-strike, twisted it with expert precision, and used Kenji's momentum against him. In one fluid motion, Marcus spun him around and pinned him down. The entire maneuver took less than 3 seconds. The dojo erupted. Students shouted, gasped, even screamed. A few clapped their hands over their mouths in disbelief. The so-called invisible janitor had just neutralized their master, the black belt they admired, without breaking a sweat. Kenji struggled against the hold, but Marcus didn't tighten his grip. He held him firmly, but without cruelty, making it clear he was in control. Then, just as calmly, Marcus released him and stepped back. Kenji scrambled to his feet, his face red with anger and embarrassment. The room was dead silent now, every pair of eyes glued to Marcus. The man they had once dismissed as ordinary now stood like a giant in their minds. Kenji rushed again, throwing a flurry of punches and kicks. His strikes were faster, more aggressive, but Marcus moved with the same unshakable calm. He dodged, blocked, redirected, every motion precise, controlled, and efficient. Not a single movement was wasted. Finally, as Kenji lunged forward with one last desperate strike, Marcus swept his leg in a controlled arc. Kenji's balance vanished, and with a thud, the instructor crashed onto the mat. The dojo froze in silence. Marcus stood tall, breathing steadily, his expression unchanged. He hadn't fought to hurt or to humiliate. He had fought to teach. And in that moment, every student understood they had just witnessed true mastery. Kenji scrambled back to his feet, his face burning with embarrassment. His pride as a master, his authority as a teacher, all of it had been shaken in seconds. He roared in frustration, launching himself at Marcus with a furious flurry of punches. His fists cut through the air in rapid succession, each strike meant to land with punishing force. But Marcus moved differently, effortlessly. His body flowed like water, sliding out of reach, redirecting attacks, never once letting Kenji's strikes touch him. To the onlookers, it was as though Marcus had trained his entire life for this moment. His calm precision made Kenji's wild aggression look clumsy. And then it happened. With a gentle but firm sweep of his leg, Marcus cut Kenji's balance out from under him. The master stumbled, crashed onto the mat, and for the second time, lay defeated. The room froze in silence. Students who once laughed at Marcus now stared at him with wide eyes, their mouths slightly open. They had never seen their instructor bested, let alone by the janitor they overlooked every single day. Marcus didn't puff out his chest. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he stood tall, his breathing steady, his face calm. He let the silence linger, making sure the lesson carried weight. Then he finally spoke, his voice low and steady, yet powerful enough to echo across the dojo. "I spent 10 years in the military," Marcus began. His words fell heavy, every syllable filled with authority. "Before that, I trained in martial arts since I was a boy. Fighting isn't about showing off. It's about discipline, respect, and knowing when not to fight." The students shifted uncomfortably, realizing how wrong they had been to laugh at him earlier. In their eyes, Marcus transformed from a janitor into a warrior, someone whose strength came not from arrogance, but from wisdom. He continued, his tone calm but unyielding. "I've seen what real violence looks like. Out there, beyond these walls, fights don't end with applause. They end with pain, loss, sometimes even death. That's why true martial artists don't fight for fun or pride. We fight only when we have no choice." A hush fell deeper over the room. No one dared to move, no one dared to laugh. Marcus's words struck harder than any punch. On the mat, Kenji sat up, his chest heaving, his face pale. The arrogance that once lit his eyes was gone. He looked at Marcus, not with mockery, but with something closer to respect and shame. He had wanted to make Marcus a spectacle, a target of humiliation. Instead, he himself had been silenced in front of everyone he taught. For the students, the moment burned into memory. The lesson was clear. Belts and titles meant nothing without humility. True strength wasn't about domination. It was about restraint, respect, and integrity. And as Marcus quietly picked up his mop again, returning to his work as if nothing had happened, the entire dojo knew they would never look at him or martial arts the same way again. The dojo remained frozen in silence, as if time itself had stopped. Kenji sat slumped on the mat, still catching his breath, his pride broken more deeply than his body. For a long, heavy moment, no one dared to speak, no one dared to move. Then it began, one single clap from a young student in the back. It echoed softly through the hall, almost hesitant, but strong enough to cut the silence. Another clap followed, then another. Soon, the sound grew louder, spreading like a wave until the entire room was filled with applause. But this wasn't the usual cheer for their master. It wasn't admiration for a flashy demonstration. No, this was different. The students weren't clapping for Kenji at all. They were clapping for Marcus. Their respect for him grew instantly. Their earlier laughter now replaced with wide-eyed awe. Whispers filled the circle, no longer mocking but reverent. He was a soldier. He moved like a master. He's more skilled than sensei. Marcus, however, didn't smile. He didn't bow or raise his hands in triumph. He simply picked up his mop, placed it back into the bucket, and returned to his work as if nothing had happened. For him, this wasn't about glory or proving himself. Victory was not measured in applause. It was measured in the lesson learned. As he walked back toward the edge of the mat, he paused. The room held its breath, waiting for his final words. Marcus turned, his gaze settling on Kenji, the proud instructor who moments ago had mocked him like a child teasing a toy. His voice was calm, steady, but it carried the kind of weight that silences even the most restless heart. Respect is earned not by your belt, Marcus said, but by how you treat others. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. They sank into the minds of every student, embedding themselves deeper than any kata or technique ever had. In that moment, the lesson was clear. Strength without humility is weakness. Kenji lowered his eyes, unable to meet Marcus's. For the first time in years, he felt small, not because of defeat, but because of the truth staring him in the face. He had spent years demanding respect because of his belt, his rank, his title. And yet, the man who had earned more respect than anyone in the room was the one holding a mop. From that day forward, no one in the dojo ever looked at Marcus as just the janitor again. He became a quiet symbol of hidden strength, humility, and discipline. For the younger students, he was living proof that greatness could come from the most unexpected places. And as for Master Kenji, he was never the same. He no longer mocked, no longer used his power to belittle. The humiliation of that day remained with him, but so did the lesson. He bowed more often, spoke more gently, and reminded his students to see every person with respect, whether they wore a black belt or carried a mop. Because he and everyone else in that dojo would never forget the day the janitor silenced the black belt. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and lets me bring you more powerful stories like this one.